Saci-Pererê was never born with one leg. He didn't ask for the red cap that lets him vanish into thin air. He didn't choose to laugh while the world burns. The Saci is not just a prankster from Brazilian folklore, he is what remains when you betray the wind, your blood, and the very land that raised you. In the late 18th century, on the sugarcane plantations of southern Brazil, where enslaved Africans, indigenous survivors, and white overseers lived in a tense, violent mix of fear, sweat, and whispered secrets, a boy named Jaci was born. Son of an enslaved African woman and a white capataz who never acknowledged him, Jaci grew up marked by difference. His dark skin stood out among his legitimate half-brothers, his left leg never fully healed after a brutal beating from his father, and his eyes seemed to see the wind before it arrived. By age 12, Jaci could already speak to the wind. He ran faster than anyone, found hidden fruits in the forest, and laughed out loud when gusts knocked the overseers' hats off. The enslaved called him son of the wind. The indigenous whispered he carried the spirit of Jaci. But his white half-brothers, the legitimate sons of the same man, saw no charm in it. They saw threat. Every time Jaci returned with a full basket or a hunted animal, their pride rotted a little more. It wasn't just envy. It was fear that the boy might one day be stronger than them. The conspiracy was born in the shadows of the Senzala and the Casa Grande. They didn't want to humiliate him. They wanted to erase him. One moonless night, they called him for a secret hunt. They promised to show him a place where the wind brought game straight to your hands. Jaci, still a child at heart, believed them. They led him to a deep clearing. They tied him to a dry tree. They poured lamp oil on the ground. And they set the fire. What came next wasn't death. It was worse. The flames devoured his left leg up to the knee. The pain was so immense that his scream turned into a whistle, a sound that pierced the entire forest. The wind, which had always listened to him, finally answered. Not to save him. To carry him. The fire went out on its own. The rope came undone. The charred leg fell like ash. What remained was a boy with one leg, a blood-soaked rag from his father's shirt fused to his head, now a red cap that would never come off. Retention hook. What happens when fire steals your leg, but the wind gives you back your soul, and your rage? Hit that like button if you think revenge doesn't need two good legs to chase you down. And subscribe if you want to see what the Saci does to those who tried to burn him away. Because the boy died in that clearing. What came back doesn't laugh for fun anymore. What happens when fire steals your leg, but the wind gives you back your soul, and your rage? Hit that like button if you think revenge doesn't need two good legs to chase you down. And subscribe if you want to see what the Saci does to those who tried to burn him away. Because the boy died in that clearing. What came back doesn't laugh for fun anymore. The flames did not kill Jaci. They killed the boy who once believed the world could be kind. When the oil-soaked ground ignited, the fire climbed his left leg like a living thing. It ate skin, muscle, tendon, until bone showed white through black char. The pain was so absolute that his scream broke into something else, a high, piercing whistle that cut through the smoke and reached the sky. The brothers who lit the fire laughed at first. Then they stopped laughing. The wind answered. It came from nowhere, a sudden gust that bent the flames sideways, tore the ropes from the tree, and lifted the burning leg clean off at the knee. The severed limb fell like a dead branch. The stump smoked. Jaci collapsed, half-conscious, tasting blood and ash. The brothers ran, convinced they had finished him. But the wind had other plans. It carried him deeper into the mata, away from the clearing, away from the fazenda. It laid him under a bamboo grove where the stalks were already thick and old. For 3 days he lay there, feverish, whispering to the air. On the 4th day, something changed. The bamboo began to sway without wind. A red rag, the blood-soaked piece of his father's shirt he had used to bandage a cut days before, fluttered down from the canopy and settled on his head. It fused to his scalp like skin. The cap. The gorro vermelho. When he opened his eyes again, the pain was gone, replaced by something colder. He tried to stand. His left leg ended in a charred stump just above the knee. But the wind lifted him anyway. It spun him in a small redemoinho, balancing him on one foot as if gravity had forgotten him. He laughed, the first laugh that wasn't a child's. It came out as a whistle. The first thing he did was return to the clearing. Not to forgive. Not to explain. To watch. The brothers had told everyone Jaci ran away. The father believed it. Or pretended to. But that night, Jaci came back on the wind. He hid in the trees. He whistled once, soft, like a lost bird. The youngest brother woke screaming, claiming a one-legged boy was laughing at him from the rafters. The next night, the middle brother found his tools scattered in perfect circles. The oldest found his horse loose, running in endless spirals until it collapsed. Small things at first. Annoyances. Reminders. But the message was clear: I'm still here. And I remember. The cap gave him more than disappearance. It gave him speed. He could vanish into a gust and reappear miles away. The pipe he found among the ashes, his father's old cachimbo, now stayed lit without tobacco. Every puff tasted like revenge. And the whistle could call the wind itself. It could make leaves dance, branches whip, dust rise in redemoinhos that blinded men and overturned carts. But the price was permanent. He could never cross running water without losing his powers. He could never touch the ground without leaving crooked tracks. And every time he laughed, every time he played, he heard the crackle of that fire in his own throat. The boy who once ran with 2 legs now moved with the wind. The child who trusted his brothers now trusted nothing but the gusts that carried him. And the mata listened. Retention hook. What happens when the wind you loved becomes the only thing that still loves you back, and it wants blood? Hit like if you think the Saci's pranks are just the beginning. And stay until the end, because the real vengeance hasn't even started. The boy who once trusted the world was gone. What rose from that bamboo grove was no longer Jaci. It was Saci, a name the wind itself gave him, whispered through the leaves like a secret curse. The gorro vermelho was the first gift of his new life. The blood-soaked rag from his father's shirt fused to his scalp during those fevered days. It became part of him, living cloth that never fell, never tore, never lost its color. When he pulled it low over his eyes, the world blurred and the wind obeyed. He could step into a gust and vanish, reappearing behind a tree, on a rooftop, or inside a locked room. The cap was freedom. It was also a chain. He could never remove it without losing the power, and he could never forget whose blood stained it. The cachimbo came next. He found it half buried in the ashes of the clearing, still warm. It was his father's old pipe, the same one the man used to smoke while watching the enslaved work. Now it belonged to Saci. It needed no tobacco. Every time he drew on it, smoke rose thick and sweet, tasting of revenge and charred wood. The smoke could carry his whistle farther, make it echo in rooms he never entered. It could make men cough until they bled, or fill their lungs with the memory of fire. With these 2 things, the cap and the pipe, Saci began to test his limits. At first, the pranks were small, almost childish. He would blow smoke under the doors of the Casa Grande, making the white family cough and curse. He would whistle from the rafters at night, making the brothers wake in cold sweat, convinced a one-legged demon was laughing at them. He would spin redemoinhos in the dust, scattering tools, overturning buckets, untying horses so they ran free into the night. But the brothers grew bolder. They told the overseer Jaci was dead, burned in an accident. They took his mother's few possessions and sold them. They bragged that the molke had finally learned his place. That was their mistake. One night, Saci came for the youngest brother, the one who had poured the oil. He waited until the man was alone in the barn. Then he whistled, soft at first, like a lost child calling for help. The brother followed the sound into the darkness. When he reached the open field, the wind rose. A redemoinho formed around him, not strong enough to lift him, but enough to blind him with dust. Branches whipped his face. His own whip, the one he used on the enslaved, flew from his belt and wrapped around his throat. He choked, gasping, until he fell to his knees. Saci appeared then, balanced on one leg, gorro low over his eyes, pipe glowing red in his mouth. He didn't speak. He just whistled once, sharp, final. The wind spun faster. The brother's body lifted a few inches, then slammed back down. When the dust settled, the man was gone. Only his whip remained, coiled in the dirt like a dead snake. The next morning, the overseer found the body in the middle of the field, no marks, no blood, just a look of pure terror frozen on the face, and a single red thread from Saci's cap caught in his hair. The second brother lasted longer. He barricaded himself in the Casa Grande, nailed the windows, kept lamps burning all night. But Saci didn't need to enter. He whistled from outside, long, low notes that echoed inside the walls. The brother heard his own voice calling him from the chimney. He heard his dead mother singing lullabies. He heard the crackle of fire that never came. After 3 nights without sleep, he ran into the mata, screaming that a one-legged boy was chasing him. They found him days later, hanging from a tree by his own belt, eyes wide open, mouth frozen in a whistle. The oldest brother, the one who planned it all, fled the fazenda. He never returned. Rumors said he lived in another province, always looking over his shoulder, always listening for asobios in the wind. Saci didn't chase him. He didn't need to. The wind would find him eventually. The pranks had become punishments. The child's laughter had become a warning. And the mata approved. Retention hook: what happens when the wind stops being your friend, and starts being your judge? Hit like if you think the Saci is still out there, waiting for the next person who thinks they can burn someone and walk away. Subscribe if you want to know how far his vengeance goes, because the fazenda was just the beginning. Saci didn't just survive the fire. He became something the mata had been waiting for, a trickster with teeth. The gorro vermelho wasn't just cloth. It was alive now. The blood from his father's shirt had soaked into it and fused with the wind that saved him. When he pulled it low over his eyes, the world tilted. He could step into a breeze and vanish completely, not just from sight, but from sound, from smell, from memory. He could reappear inside a locked barn, on the roof of the Casa Grande, or behind a man who thought he was alone. The cap was freedom. It was also a chain. If anyone ever snatched it off his head, all his power vanished until he reclaimed it. That was the first rule he learned, and the first rule he made sure others paid for breaking. The cachimbo was no ordinary pipe. It burned without fuel, and every puff carried a piece of the fire that took his leg. The smoke could thicken into a fog that choked lungs, or thin into a whisper that carried his whistle across miles. He could blow a ring of smoke that spun into a tiny redemoinho, or exhale a cloud that made men see their worst fears. The pipe never left his lips for long. It was his anchor, the last thing that tied him to the human world he hated. With these 2 items, the cap and the pipe, Saci discovered the full extent of what he could do. He could call redemoinhos, small at first, then larger, strong enough to lift a man off his feet and spin him until he vomited dust. He could whistle tunes that made animals panic, horses bolt, dogs howl at nothing. He could hide objects in pockets of air, a whip, a knife, a child's toy, and make them reappear days later in the wrong hands. He could make branches whip like lashes, leaves blind eyes, roots trip feet. And he could disappear so completely that even the wind forgot where he went. But there were rules, rules the mata enforced, rules he could not break. He could never cross running water. Rivers, streams, even a strong rain channel, the moment his foot touched moving water, the gorro lost its power, the pipe went cold, and he fell like any mortal. That was why he avoided the big rivers. That was why he haunted the dry interior, the red earth roads, the dust fields. He could never stay in one place too long. The wind wouldn't let him. If he tried to rest in the same tree for more than a few nights, the gusts would push him onward, restless, angry. He was bound to movement, always moving, always watching. And he could never kill without reason. The Mata allowed pranks, allowed pain, allowed fear. But pointless murder angered the spirits. When he went too far, the wind turned against him, blew the gorro off, made the pipe burn his lips. So he learned restraint. He scared. He hurt. He humiliated. But he let most live, so they could tell the story. Over time, the pranks became something more. He began protecting the weak. When an overseer beat an enslaved child, Saci would untie the horses at night, scatter the tools, make the whips disappear. When a capataz burned a patch of mata to plant more cane, Saci would spin redemoinhos that buried the seeds in dust. When a child was left alone and crying, Saci would whistle lullabies from the trees until the mother came running. He was no hero. He was vengeance wearing a child's laugh. But the Mata approved. The wind carried his name farther. The enslaved began leaving small offerings, a bit of tobacco, a red ribbon, a pipeful of smoke, not out of fear, but out of respect. They knew, hurt the weak, and the Saci would find you. And he always found you. What happens when the trickster stops playing, and starts judging? Hit like if you think the Saci is still out there, protecting the ones nobody else will. Subscribe if you want to see how far he'll go, because the fazenda fell, but the vengeance never stopped. The fazenda fell. The brothers died or fled. The overseer left. But the Saci did not stop. He never stops. The wind doesn't rest, and neither does he. As the centuries passed, the world changed. The sugarcane gave way to soy fields. The enslaved became workers. The Mata shrank. But the Saci adapted. He learned the sound of motors. He learned the hum of generators. He learned the whine of chainsaws and the roar of trucks. And he used them. In the 1980s, when the first large-scale deforestation hit the interior, Saci began to appear on the edges of cleared land. He would whistle near the machinery, not loud enough to be heard over the engines, but just enough to slip into the gaps between noise. The drivers would feel at first, a sudden chill, a whisper in the ear that sounded like their own name. Then the redemoinhos came. Small at first, dust devils that scattered papers and tools. Then larger. A gust strong enough to tip a tractor. A whirlwind that lifted a chainsaw into the air and dropped it on its own blade. Men started disappearing. Not many at first. One logger would step away to relieve himself and never return. Another would walk into the remaining trees for shade and vanish. Search parties found inverted tracks, 1 foot, small, circling the spot where the man was last seen. No body. No blood. Just the tracks, spiraling tighter and tighter until they stopped. As if the wind had lifted him straight up. By the 2000s, the story spread. Truck drivers on dirt roads reported hearing asobios over their radios. Harvesters saw red flashes in the rearview mirrors, a small figure with one leg, sitting on the load, laughing. When they stopped, the figure was gone. But the engine wouldn't start again until they left the area. In the 2010s and 2020s, Saci learned technology. He no longer needed to be close. He could whistle from miles away, and the wind carried it. GPS devices began spinning in circles. Thermal cameras showed heat signatures that vanished mid-frame. Drones lost signal the moment they flew over certain patches of remaining mata. The operators would see a small figure on the feed, one leg, red cap, pipe in mouth, waving before the screen went black. He doesn't kill everyone. He scares. He humiliates. He reminds. A bulldozer operator who cut down a sacred tree found his machine buried in vines overnight. A soy farmer who burned a strip of forest woke to find his entire crop circle trampled by a single set of inverted footprints. A mining company that poisoned a river had their pumps fail one by one, no mechanical fault, just water that refused to flow until they left. The offerings changed too. In the old days, it was tobacco and ribbons left by the enslaved. Now, in the cities and on the highways, people leave small red caps on fence posts, or blow smoke from pipes toward the wind when they feel a sudden gust. They do it quietly. They don't talk about it. But they do it. Saci is no longer just a figure of the roca. He walks the edges of highways. He hides in dust clouds on dirt roads. He whistles through air conditioners in the city. And he remembers. The wind remembers everything. What happens when the wind that once carried your name now carries your fear? Hit like if you think the Saci is still adapting, still protecting what little is left. Subscribe if you want to know what he'll do next, because the forest is shrinking, but his rage is only growing. The Saci is not one. He is many. And he is born the same way every time. The elders in the interior still whisper the old secret, not in the open, not around children, but in low voices after the fire dies down. The Saci-Pererê is not born from a woman. He is born from bamboo. But not just any bamboo. There is a type of bamboo, tall, thin, sharp-edged, that takes exactly 7 years to grow from seed to full stalk. If, during those 7 years, a great betrayal happens nearby, someone burned alive, someone betrayed by blood, someone left to die by fire and envy, the bamboo drinks the pain. It absorbs the scream that became a whistle. It grows twisted. And on the 7th year, when the stalk is tallest, a new Saci emerges from the joint nearest the ground. The first Saci, Jaci, was the original. He was burned at the base of a bamboo grove. The wind saved him, the gorro fused to his head, and he became the first. But every time another person suffers the same betrayal, tied, burned, left for dead by those who should protect them, a new bamboo stalk begins to twist. 7 years later, another Saci steps out. One leg charred, red cap fused, pipe in mouth, whistle ready. That is the twist no one tells. The Mata does not forget. The wind does not forgive. And when humanity repeats the same sin, envy, fire, betrayal, the Mata answers with another Saci. They are not copies. Each one carries the memory of his own burning. Each one is angrier than the last. The old ritual to prevent it still exists. If you find a bamboo stalk growing twisted, marked with faint red veins or smelling of smoke, you must burn it before the 7th year. Cut it down, burn the root, scatter the ashes in running water. If you do it right, the potential Saci dies unborn. But if you fail, if the fire is not hot enough, if the water is not fast enough, the stalk opens. A small figure steps out. One leg missing. Eyes already glowing with remembered pain. And the wind welcomes him with a whistle. That is why the offerings continue. Not just to appease the old Saci, but to beg him not to let another one be born. Because every time someone is betrayed and burned, the Mata asks the same question, do you deserve another Saci? And the wind always answers yes. Final moral, the Saci is not punishment for being weak. He is punishment for being cruel. He is what happens when you take a child's trust, set it on fire, and expect the ashes to stay quiet. The wind remembers. The bamboo remembers. And when the 7th year comes, the Mata gives birth to justice. So if you ever hear a whistle in the dust of a dirt road, or feel a sudden gust that smells of smoke and blood, don't laugh. Don't run. Don't answer. Just leave an offering. And hope it's enough. Because the next Saci might be born from your own fire.